T. Huh?
It's 5:04 and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Tuesday morning to you. We start off with some news out of Mecklenburg County this morning. The North Carolina Sheriff's Association, the NCSA, has issued a statement condemning comments allegedly made by Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden. They described them as, quote, inflammatory, racially derogatory, insulting, and offensive. These comments surfaced following the resignation of Chief Deputy Kevin Canty. That was last week. He accused McFadden, the sheriff, of creating a, quote, toxic and abusive work environment. Canty's claim was that McFadden continually used racially charged language to describe both white and black officers within the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office, and that was backed up by audio recordings. The NCSA, which represents all 100 sheriffs, which includes all 100 counties in North Carolina, expressed deep concern over the allegations and emphasized that sheriffs uphold the highest standard of professionalism and serve all community members equally. And obviously, trust in law enforcement has been a hot topic over the last couple of years. At a graduation event for the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Department on Friday, McFadden denied the claims that he was racist. He had this to say on Friday.
That's the elephant in the room. The reason that I cannot be racist, because I don't want anybody to go through what I go through since I was born into this world as a black man. Let me say that again. I don't want anybody to go through what I continuously go through even to this second.
That's Mecklenburg County Sheriff McFadden. McFadden has been in the news as of late. He continues to refuse to cooperate with federal immigration and customs enforcement, that's ICE, and has positioned himself at odds with House Bill 10, which was a law passed by the North Carolina General Assembly to mandate ICE cooperation. There is a strong possibility that HB 10 gets a veto override this week when the General Assembly is back in session. Governor Roy Cooper vetoed that legislation. That is expected soon, so McFadden will soon have to follow that cooperation with ICE. If House Bill 10 is overridden, we'll continue to track that throughout the week. A busy week in North Carolina politics coming up here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:07, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Still tracking stories out of Western North Carolina this morning. We've got an update on the prison situation. Katie Zender from the Carolina Journal joins us this morning on the News Hour. Katie, there is a group that is pushing to get some prisoners released. Based on the headline itself, it's rather interesting. What are some of the details that you're learning this morning?
Right. Good morning, Nick. Thank you so much for having me on. Yes. So several human rights advocacy groups have sent a letter to the Department of Adult Corrections in North Carolina. Several heads at the department, including Todd Ishii, the Secretary of Adult Correction. And so what they are advocating for is for the release of low-risk inmates to kind of deal with some of these overcrowding issues that we have experienced in some of the prisons here and correctional facilities as a result of Hurricane Helene. So some of the correctional facilities and prisons did not sustain damage themselves, but because of the damage to water infrastructure and electrical infrastructure, these prisoners have had to be transferred out of these correctional facilities. So it's been causing some overcrowding in other correctional facilities in Eastern North Carolina.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up. Obviously, there was so much that went on 6 weeks ago when the storm first impacted the area, and it wasn't long after the storm moved away that we did hear from the Department of Corrections that they were working on getting some of these folks relocated. So is it still the case that they're dealing with some of those infrastructure issues and they haven't been able to move those folks back yet?
Correct. So that is my understanding of the situation, Nick, that they haven't been able to, transfer anyone back to these prisons. Over 2,000 people were transferred following the week the hurricane hit. So yeah, to my understanding of the situation, none of these prisoners have been transferred back to their original institutions.
So with that, they mentioned in their letters that they've sent to the state, they've mentioned low-risk individuals. Do they give any examples, Katie, of what a low-risk individual might be or who would or would not potentially qualify if they got their wishes in these letters they've sent?
So they don't go into a ton of detail on that. I think it is, criminals that are being incarcerated on a technical liability, a technical violation, situations like that. But they don't give a ton of detail on who would qualify for that and who wouldn't.
How about timelines? Has there been any response from the state to this, or really any update as to when some of these facilities could get back open? I know, crime was a big issue on folks' minds in the election last week, Katie, and the headline there, releasing individuals from prison due to capacity, may rub some people the wrong way, saying they may have just voted on that issue just last week.
Right. So I was able to speak a little bit with Keith Acree. He's the communications director for the Department of Corrections. And one of the first things that I asked him was, in this letter that the advocates' rights groups put out, they talk about the overcrowding and the fact that these facilities are over capacity, and they give very specific numbers. So I called him and I said, can you confirm these numbers? Are these numbers correct? And he told me, quote, "We have no idea where they got these numbers." Now, to be clear, he didn't say that the numbers were inaccurate. He just said, "We don't know where these numbers came from." He said, also, prison capacity rates are extremely complicated to determine, is one thing that he told me. And there's actually 3 tiers of prison capacity rates. There's standard operating capacity, expanded capacity, and then there's maximum capacity. So we don't know what tier of capacity these numbers are even based on, or if these numbers are even factual or where they came from. But in terms of your original question, Nick, they said the Department of Adult Correction has received a letter from the advocacy groups. Many of the claims made in the letter are misinformed or grossly exaggerated. The time frame for water and sewer restoration to the 5 vacant institution remains unclear. So they don't even really know themselves, what the timeline is going to look like at this point.
Well, I'm glad you gave that summary of what the letters are. What are some of those percentages that they are claiming that the state says, well, maybe there's more to the story here than meets the eye?
Right. So a couple examples. One of the highest ones is the Anson Correctional Center for Women. It's 118%. But then we also have lower ones, such as Rutherford Correctional Facility, as 101.3%. And I believe the highest one was Pamlico Correctional Facility at 136.7%. So, these range anywhere from 1% over capacity to 36% over capacity. So there's a very wide range here. And again, we don't know where these numbers came from. We don't know where they're getting these numbers. And we don't know if the numbers are correct or in what tier level of capacity they're basing these numbers on.
It's a very interesting story. We'll continue to follow it. Katie Zender joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:13, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to head on over to the traffic center and get an update on the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. 99.3
WBT.
Huh? It's 5:19. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. You can also check out our show streaming live on YouTube each and every morning over on the Carolina Journal YouTube channel, and check out our podcast wherever your podcasts are available, and listen on your computer at WBT.com. Just click on the podcast tab. Well, just 1 week after Election Day, it seems like it was forever ago, just 1 week ago, we are learning a lot out of the Trump administration in terms of his cabinet picks. We've got a likely list of individuals and some that have already accepted positions. Yesterday, a busy day for the president-elect's transition team. Trump announced on Monday that he is tapping former Republican Lee Zeldin of New York, who ran for governor and almost became the governor of New York back 2 years ago, to lead the Environmental Protection Agency, citing his, quote, very strong legal background and claiming that he is a true fighter for American first policies. In a statement, Zeldin, a Trump ally, again, who ran for governor, said that he will ensure fair and swift deregulatory decisions that will be enacted in a way to unleash the power of American business, while at the same time maintaining the highest environmental standards. With that, we also heard that Trump has announced that Stephen Miller will be stepping up as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. That was reported by multiple media outlets yesterday. Miller was a senior advisor to Trump during his first administration and one of the architects of his 2024 presidential campaign. Stephen Miller will be stepping in as the Deputy Chief of Staff. Trump has appointed his former Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director, Tom Homan, in the same role. That was announced yesterday, as well as Trump continues to rank up rhetoric that was very important in the election, dealing with border security. Tom Homan is back for the border czar. The UN ambassador, that was announced on Sunday, and Trump announced that he'd be nominating GOP conference chair Representative Elise Stefanik, another New York representative, for the United Nations ambassador role. She told the New York Post yesterday that she has accepted his offer. And in a first ever, the chief of staff for the Trump administration, the first time a female will ever serve in that position, Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, was announced just days after Trump's election win. That was his first major administrative pick, and as I mentioned, Wiles will be the first woman to hold that position. There are, of course, a couple of other major cabinet positions that remain unfilled. Attorney General, there's been some names floated around for that, including Senator Mike Lee. Some other positions, including Secretary of State, seeing some comments online this morning. There is some rumblings that Senator Marco Rubio from Florida is likely to be the one picked for that position as well. That's being reported by multiple media outlets. However, there are some other names that are thrown in there as well as Secretary of State, a major position in the Trump administration. That's something that we will continue to track as the transition team continues to be filled out, and we'll provide those details here each and every morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:23, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. It's my pleasure to welcome to our airwaves this morning the 74th governor of North Carolina. Pat McCrory joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 1 week removed from Election Day, Governor McCrory, give us your overall 50,000-foot view of what we saw unfold last Tuesday.
Well, let me give you a quick three. One is the working class had a very strong voice. The people who are living paycheck to paycheck, hourly workers, regardless of their gender or color or other issues, they had a very strong voice. The people who were not benefiting from the strong stock market had a very, very strong voice. They did not think the economy has gotten better. They don't agree that inflation's less. The rate of inflation is less, but not inflation. The price haven't gone down. I think the second thing that I would say is that the North Carolina voter continued to be a maverick voter. At least 5 to 10% of them who split their tickets. They voted for Trump, then they voted for Stein or an independent party, and then they split their votes on the other, from treasurer to attorney general to lieutenant governor. Typical North Carolina voter, where 5 to 10% of the people who split their ticket determined the council of state. And probably the third thing is Republicans got to do a better job in selecting a gubernatorial candidate that can win a general election. There's no doubt to me Robinson was a drain on the ticket, and a lot of us knew it. And that might have impacted several of the council state races because the Democrats were smart to pile on that issue. And frankly, the Democrats also continued to elect a governor where during the campaign there was very little information about where they stand on any issues. So that's the long held tradition now. Stein, Cooper, Easley, they just stay quiet and do the attack ads and not make it about themselves. And they get both moderate and liberal voices with the constituency not knowing where they stand on any issues outside their TV commercials about the SBI crime lab for the second decade in a row.
Let me ask you about those maverick voters. It's often said that a lot of voters really don't follow politics that closely. They show up on election day. If they're a Republican, they vote straight Republican ticket. If they're a Democrat, they vote straight Democrat ticket. Governor Corey, we have seen election after election that is not the case, at least with the Council of State. It's often split here in North Carolina. Does that mean that people are maybe more informed than we may think on the outside?
I think it does. Plus, the Republicans, I think, foolishly took away the straight ticket when I ran for re-election as governor. I think that was the year they did it. So Republicans used to benefit from the straight ticket, especially if we had a strong candidate on top, which it ended up we did. So I think they probably would like to revisit that one. I think that had an impact on my candidacy, my 16 election, in separating me and Trump by a percentage point or two. And I lost my election by 10,000 votes. So, but yeah, I think we have at least 5 to 10% of the voter does split their ticket. There's no doubt about it. And plus, the independent voter outnumbers both the Republican and Democrat voter. And I will mention one other thing. Since I was chairman of Right Count in North Carolina here, the voting system has stood up pretty strong, especially out west concerning the hurricane. And it looks like the voter turnout out west was greater than than Mecklenburg County and Charlotte regarding percentage of turnout. Although I understand there are a few issues regarding mail-in voting. I'm not sure where that's happening. But overall, I haven't heard complaints about the voting process in North Carolina. They didn't have the controversy that they had in 216 with me regarding Durham, for example, where early votes were turned in late. I just haven't heard any major complaints regarding the voting process. We still need to educate our voter about how the voting process works, though. I wish we'd teach more civics in our schools from K through 12 to universities and community colleges. I think we ought to have civics and voting be a part of that civics.
We'll continue the conversation with the former governor of North Carolina, Pat McCrory, coming up after this. It's now 5:28, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to head back and get a look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick, and we continue.
It's 5:34. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Continuing to track some statewide news this morning in response to overcrowding concerns following the transfer of some 2,000 inmates due to Hurricane Helene. There are now 9 different advocacy groups across the state that are urging North Carolina to release some prisoners. Yeah, pretty shocking headline. In a letter dated October the 31st, these left-leaning organizations proposed releasing 400 women and 1,500 men, advocating for reduction in the prison population, citing overcrowding in multiple facilities. The North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections, that's NCDAC, disputes those claims and describes them as, quote, misinformed or grossly exaggerated. The prison system faced minimal storm damage out in western North Carolina, but several community infrastructure issues have led to evacuations from 5 different facilities. NCDAC spokesperson Keith Aker clarified that calculating prison capacities is very complicated, involving several capacity tiers, and while plans are underway to reassign inmates as water and sewer systems are restored to those 5 facilities out in western North Carolina, the timeline for some of those facilities remain uncertain. This push for the early release echoes efforts from the COVID-19 pandemic, when similar advocacy groups called for the release of vulnerable inmates. However, John Gaze of the John Locke Foundation cautions against measures perceived as he describes these, noting public backlash against crime spikes associated with early releases. The North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections is expected to formally respond to those advocacy groups soon. They haven't as of yet, and when they do, we will continue to track those details over at carolinajournal.com. With that, 7 people remain unaccounted for in North Carolina following Helene, as that death toll from the storm has been held now at 102 for the last couple of weeks. We get a Monday update from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and those numbers remain firm right now. Still 7 people that are unaccounted for. You can only imagine that situation unfolding. There were fatalities reported across 22 counties out west, according to Health and Human Services. The vast majority of those fatalities being reported in Buncombe County, where 43 people died, 10 people in Yancey, and 10 in Henderson County as well. We have gotten some encouraging news, at least over the last couple of weeks. However, some of these communities out in western North Carolina that have gotten water, power, and various utilities restored are now encouraging individuals to visit. We talked a lot about this after the storm affected portions of western North Carolina, that this is their peak time for tourism, very similar to how the East Coast has their busy summer months as folks are visiting the beaches. It is the fall and winter time that, of course, incur a whole bunch of tourism activity out west, and we've now heard from some of these small towns and municipalities saying, yes, the doors are open, come visit. As of this morning, there are still 454 individuals without power. 311 of them are in Yancey County. That was one of the hardest hit areas, and 79 and Mitchell County, 5 in Madison, as power restoration does continue for some areas where it still could take months to get power restored, as crews from Duke Energy and other power utilities have to run miles worth of lines up hills and mountain sides to get power and electrical service restored to some of those customers. The saga out west is something that we have been tracking for the better part of 6 weeks, and we'll continue to do that here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Continuing our conversation this morning with the former governor of North Carolina, Pat McCrory, here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. As we look at those results, something for Republicans to really grasp onto since the 2020 election, of course, pending the results of the Supreme Court race, which is still very close. They will have gone 10 for 10 on statewide judicial races since then. What do you make of that when we talk about, again, these maverick voters that kind of weave their way down the ballot, voting for some Democrats and some Republicans?
A lot of it follows the money. The Democrats put their money in the Attorney General's race every year. They consider that very important for the Democrats, and the trial attorneys put a lot of money in that race because of the class action suits the Attorney General participates in. So the lawyers that the Attorney General hires, whether it goes back to Easley or Hunt, now Cooper, and in the future Stein, the lawyers put a lot of money in the Attorney General's race for the Democrats. The Lieutenant Governor's race was quite different this time. Jim Hunt's daughter was involved, so she raised a lot of money. She changed her name to Hunt back, I think, 4 or 8 years ago when she first ran for office. So the Hunt name is now back in North Carolina politics. Secretary of State Elaine Marshall continues to get elected, and yet the auditor, the treasurer, are Republican. And I think one other, the superintendent, I think we lost the superintendent by not voting for the incumbent that used to work for me in as governor. She would have won, I think, the superintendent race very easily, but we as Republicans foolishly kicked her out of the primary, which again, we put our own gun to our head regarding Republicans and losing that race.
Let me ask you about the primary. There's been some movement over the last couple of years, at least chatter on the Republican side of the political aisle, to go to more of a closed primary system where as you noted, the largest voting bloc in the state is those unaffiliated voters. Do you think there'll be any movement on that as we continue down this political cycle, that we stay in strict party primaries? If you're a registered Republican, you vote in that primary. If you're a registered Democrat, you vote in theirs, and you don't have this group in the middle that can pick and choose based on the election cycle?
I strongly disagree with that. I don't believe in closing even more election process because, frankly, there are examples of the political parties failing in picking the best candidate. I think the Democrats see that with Kamala Harris. If they would have had a more open process, they probably would have picked a more moderate person to challenge President Trump. And in the Republican side for governor, that would have made the primary race even stronger for Robinson, who lost the general election by 15 points. Yeah. We've never seen that. And so, no, I think that would be a major problem, and it's really discouraging people. It's forcing people to go to one of the political parties. And I think as a Republican, I still think the Republican Democratic Party have too much of a monopoly. I believe in free markets, not just in business, but in politics. And right now we're wanting a duopoly for the powers to be. And that means they don't like competition. Listen, if you don't appeal to a wider group in the primary, you're going to lose the general election. We just saw that in the governor's race. We saw that in the superintendent of public education. And we may have seen that in the attorney general's race. I don't know how the numbers look, but that impacted us Republicans. We got to appeal to independents before the general election.
Pat McCrory joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:43, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to head on over and take a look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Nick, we're in great shape so far. Huh?
It's 5:50. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. My name is Nick Craig. A good Tuesday morning to you. We are streaming live as well on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. We turn our attention to Mecklenburg County this morning, where the sheriff in Gary McFadden is under some heat from the North Carolina Sheriff's Association. They issued a statement late last week condemning comments allegedly made by the Mecklenburg County Sheriff, describing them as inflammatory, racially derogatory, insulting, and offensive. These comments surfaced following the resignation of Chief Deputy Kevin Canty, who accused McFadden of creating a, quote, toxic and abusive work environment. Canty claims McFadden used racially charged language multiple times to describe both white and black officers within the department, and that was backed up with audio recordings that were produced by Canty. The Sheriff's Association, which represents all 100 sheriffs in North Carolina, expressed deep concern over these audio recordings and allegations and emphasized that sheriffs should uphold the highest standards of professionalism and serve all community members equally, regardless of their background. Now, the Mecklenburg County Sheriff at a graduation event for the Sheriff's Department, which took place on Friday, denied being racist and stated this in front of a crowd of new cadets.
That's the elephant in the room. The reason that I cannot be racist, because I don't want anybody to go through what I go through since I was born into this world as a black man. Let me say that again. I don't want anybody to go through what I continuously go through, even to this second.
That's Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden on Friday at that graduation ceremony. Additionally, McFadden remains at odds with state government in his refusal to cooperate with federal immigrations and customs enforcement, that's ICE. It has positioned him at odds with the state on that. House Bill 10, which is a piece of legislation that was passed by the General Assembly last year, mandates ICE cooperation. However, Governor Roy Cooper did veto that legislation. The North Carolina Senate overrode the veto, with the House expected to do so as early as this week. So McFadden could have to deal with ICE and have to go and deal with immigrations and customs enforcement as early as this week. If the House is able to successfully override that veto, that's going to be a story that we are tracking not only here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, but over on our website, carolinajournal.com. Well, 1 week removed from Election Day, we are continuing to watch a couple of close races across the state, and this is now the second time that we have had a razor-close race for North Carolina Supreme Court. And this race not only has implications for the future of the state in terms of its legal proceedings, but in terms of political control of the judiciary, and it remains razor-thin this morning. Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin currently leads Democrat incumbent Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs by about 7,600 votes. That's as of yesterday. It was about 10,000 votes or so when polls closed and we started getting details 1 week ago into the late night on Tuesday, early morning hours of last Wednesday. So down a couple thousand votes since then, but still about a 7,600 vote lead for him. Election officials across all 100 counties are in the process of counting mail-in ballots that were delivered by hand to election offices on Election Day, as well as provisional ballots. These are individuals that, for whatever reason, were unable to cast a normal ballot on Election Day. They had to vote provisionally, which does require further investigation from the local Board of Elections to determine whether that person who voted was eligible to vote or not. It includes people who came to the polls without a valid ID, maybe they voted in the wrong precinct, or who didn't appear on the registered list of voters. Those individuals had to cast a provisional ballot. As counties finish that counting process, the exact margins of the race are expected to continue to move up and down through the rest of this week until results are made final during a process called canvass, which ends on Friday. After canvass is finished, if the race is decided by fewer than 10,000 votes, the trailing candidate would be permitted to request a recount, and in all likelihood, it will be closer than that 10,000 vote margin. However, even a recount is likely not to move 10,000 votes in that state. The campaign manager for Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs said, quote, "Right now our goal is to allow the county boards of elections the time that they need to do the work of the county canvass. This means that our team will be patient and monitor results as canvass continues. We thank every election worker who is contributing time and energy to this process." With that, Justice Griffin, however, was told the local media outlets yesterday that he expects to win once all the votes are counted, and said, quote, "I am grateful for the support that I have received and am saddened by the tone and tenor of my opponent's campaign, and confident that we will remain on top as the county boards finish their work." On election night, officials counted almost 99% of all ballots, and nearly all contests were able to be called for one candidate or another. However, there are still some state legislative races as well as this Supreme Court race that remain razor thin. Just for a little bit of a history for you, a recent North Carolina Supreme Court race was decided by 401 votes. That's when Supreme Court, and now the Chief Justice on the Supreme Court in Paul Newby, won his election by 401 statewide votes after over 5 million votes were cast in that election cycle. These races often do come down to a razor-thin margin. We are getting additional numbers day by day, and we'll continue to track them right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. A lot going on in North Carolina this week. Taking a look at the legislative calendar, we are expecting some potential movement. There is a joint legislative commission hearing dealing with some hurricane response and recovery. We'll be tracking all of that and bringing you the latest right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We are back tomorrow morning, 5 to 6 a.m. right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.